another round of applause. That was beautiful. I didn't want to say in my little spiel about you that you are a Beyonce fanatic.
Card-carrying
Yes. I thought you guys would all figure that out for yourselves, and you did. Thank you so much for being here and for giving us that talk. Are there any questions that anyone may have? Yes.
So when you were getting to the point that you're at now, were you ever too transparent in certain situations and you had to pull it back, or you had to be more transparent and things? How do you kind of find your
Okay, have to repeat this for the video. So throughout your career, your journey, did you ever find times where you were a little too transparent? Did you ever have to pull back? Was there any, censoring or checking on yourself about being transparent?
I think early in my professional career, I always found myself sometimes being the youngest person in the workplace, sometimes the only Black person, sometimes the only Black female. And so I don't think I was very transparent. I came to work to do my job. I didn't really try to be super friendly with people and talk about my life because I just wanted to be perceived as professional. And so I feel like now I'm in a space where the staff in my office now, we're all pretty young. Our executive director of the party is African American. Our finance director is African American. Our compliance director is a woman. Our voter file manager is a young LGBT member. And so we all are in this kind of safe space where now I feel like I can be more transparent. But early on in my career, I felt like I couldn't.
Your hand, yes.
How do you push back on institutions that are not as interested in being transparent or accountable? So institutions that are typically historically white-led and perpetrating systematic racism, and institutions that fund you when it comes down to it. So what advice would you give that person?
So, for the video.
For the folks at home.
For the folks at home. So how do you deal with institutions that transparency is not their priority? Especially how do you do, I want to follow up on that, how do you do that? How does that differ from you having been a journalist and then till now being the communications director at the Democratic Party?
Okay. Oh, that's a good one. It's a hard one. So before I joined the Maryland Democratic Party, I was one of those people who, shut down 83 and laid down in the street because I felt, well, what else can I do? People are dying. How do I get people to look and pay attention? And so I think part of that is organizing in your community. And I think another part of that solution is trying to form power in institutions with like-minded people, with the mindset and the goal of achieving the end goal of what you feel like the institution that is lacking should be doing. Again, not in my role as Maryland Democratic Party comm director. I think we need new institutions. I think we need new ideas. I think we are relying sometimes too much on expecting old institutions to catch up with where we are now as a society. Does that answer your question somewhat? Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? I saw a hand somewhere here.
Yeah. Just curious, can you talk a little bit more about your transition from higher education to the political sector?
Sure.
Okay. Question is, can you talk a little bit more about your journey from higher education to the political sector?
After I left newspapers, I started working for a for-profit education industry. And after a while, I didn't really like that. It did not align with my values personally. And so I started working for another higher education institution. I started working at Johns Hopkins, and like all institutions, there are issues there. But at the time, I was still writing and doing freelance work, and I had connections within local government. And so I was asked to do some freelance work for a candidate running for mayor in the primary. And in that process, my name kind of got around to a lot of people. People liked the work I did. People heard about my reputation. And so I really liked working at Johns Hopkins. I'm like a very practical person. So I'm like, this is a stable job. Johns Hopkins isn't going anywhere. It will be here until, long after I'm dead. I can work here, and this will be great. But I got a call about a position that was going to be posted soon, and someone said, hey, I think this very much aligns with who you are. You should apply. I mean, they're probably going to interview a lot of people, but it doesn't hurt to apply. Just go ahead and try it. And so I hadn't been writing professionally for a very long time. Even though I minored in political science, like I said, I don't consider myself a political person. And so I sent my resume just thinking the worst they can do is send me an email back saying, thanks for applying. We found other candidates who, were more qualified. But I went on the interview and impressed everyone in the room. And so I think my advice for people looking to transition or make that leap from different careers is to try to find a mentor. That's something that has been very challenging for me, but I've been able to make those connections. So try to find a mentor, and don't be afraid of rejection. Don't be afraid of taking that risk.
Any other questions?
Hi, Dad.
You being my daughter and being on the ground part of foot soldier, there's a middle group of people that aren't connected through the internet, Twitter, and different things that are electronic. What do you think needs to be done to keep them abreast of what's going on and not lose that generation?
So this is, oh, I'm sorry. I defer.
Let your hype man do it. Okay. For the video, Jazzmen's dad is asking a question.
Called me Dad.
So yeah, the question is for, there's a handful, there's a lot of them across the country that do not know what social media is, do not have access to it. How do you keep them in the know of what's going on?
So the digital divide is very real. And one thing that I've tried to do in my role at the Democratic Party is to think about ways to get our elected officials to literally go to the communities to meet their constituents where they are, as opposed to just relying on an email list or relying on an appearance on a cable news program, because not everyone has cable, not everyone has access to internet. And I think, especially in this most recent election cycle, our outreach director, our former outreach director, who is now our executive director, has made a lot of inroads in communities, going to churches and different community groups and telling people, hey, we know we haven't always showed up. We know that sometimes we only come to your community to come to your church the week before an election and to be photographed clapping or shaking hands. And so people appreciate the personal touch. People appreciate when you go to their houses and knock on their doors and talk to them, or when they can see you at a local business in their community. So I think getting our elected officials out of City Hall or out of Annapolis and into the communities, talking to people, asking them, what do you care about? What issues what messages aren't we hearing from you? You can't replace that face-to-face interaction.
And I guess to follow with that also deals in the non-political sphere, right? So is anyone anyone does like social media for a living, social media marketing, anything like that. So yeah, so part of that, you know, I guess you'd be working in a team, right? And if it's coordinated events or what have you, but some of the most, people still don't think that, you know, word of mouth still is effective, and it's just as effective as, you know, putting a tweet or a Facebook post or whatever. And one of the issues I think that we have in the city is that we've gotten, like you said, so accustomed to social media and being behind a tablet or a computer that we don't go out, and we're no longer the ears to the ground, and interacting with human beings and saying, hey, we have things happening. I'm not going to curse. Like, there's a child in here. I thought about that. But yeah, so there's I think that's the separation, where there's individuals that are able to be out of their comfort zones, which is weird now. It's like getting word of mouth and actually interacting with human beings. That is a hard thing to do. That makes us stand out from those individuals that stay behind the computers to continuously give out those tweets and those Facebook posts and things like that.
So can you talk a little bit about the people who are not necessarily just posting on social media, people who overthink it? I find that as a small business owner, wanting to sort of show personality, but also recognize I'm working with USAID, and I can't just post any old thing over there. I find myself almost not curating my feed at all because I'm overthinking. So talk about how you strike that balance when you know your audience is diverse in terms of who they are.
So the question is, what about the people that are not like social media wizards, right? And have a hard time trying to curate for their audience when their audience is steadily growing and changing. How do you find a balance into kind of curating all of that?
That is a challenge that I experienced when I first started with the Maryland Democratic Party, because they had they had a Twitter account, but it wasn't very active. And so sometimes it would just like retweet stories from like the Baltimore Sun or other local newspapers. And so I had to like test a lot of things to see what worked. I knew our overall mission as a party. I knew our goals, I knew our values, and it was just a matter of figuring out how to convey that using maybe video. Maybe, you know, actual text wasn't the best way to do that, or maybe an image, or maybe relying on sometimes our surrogates who people knew and trusted to get them to convey a message for us, to kind of build trust in an audience within that social network. So it took a lot of testing to figure out what that fine balance was. And I also looked at other social media profiles that I thought were doing a good job to kind of draw inspiration from, not to just wholesale steal their stuff, but to get an idea of what I think works, or, well, what would make me look at this, or what would make me want to send it to my friend or take a screenshot and send it to someone. So I definitely think it's just a matter of trial and error, and not being afraid to test different things.
Any other questions? We still have time.
You're talking about the line between transparency and vulnerability, especially on things like Facebook, and I catch myself too, where trying to present a version of myself, people everywhere, and the best selfie, the best booties, post that kind of thing. But at the same time, when I see people posting very personal things on Facebook, I tend to pull back a little and think like, this isn't the appropriate place to do that, or this is kind of weird, like why are you telling me this really deep, personal, deep much stuff? Because I would say, I mean, at least 50% of your followers are not people that you would normally share things like this with if you were sitting down with them. So how do you, like, what's your opinion on that
I don't know why, but fakery in this dancery just came to mind. Mary J. Blige.
That'll be
Next month's topic. Now she's dancing in my head. Okay. So, yeah, the dancing. Okay, so the question, fakery versus TMI on being personal on Facebook or social media in general. How do you balance that with the conflict of transparency and vulnerability?
So I believe it was last week, I saw a lot of status updates about National Coming Out Day. And I noticed that next to some people's posts, they had that little gear icon. So clearly, they were posting these very personal status updates, but they were only sharing it with select people in their groups. So you can make a list on Twitter, you can make a list on Facebook, so that not everyone can see what you're sharing. I have had to use this function for several reasons. A couple of years ago, I posted, it was a lot. It was a lot. And it was about gender and race. And I'm usually not one to pop off on social media with like very uninformed opinions. It was like well thought out, like I typed it in Microsoft Word, like I really did the most. And when I posted it, for about like 3 to 4 hours, people were like, this is very insightful. I never really thought about it that way. Thank you for sharing. Clearly, this is something that matters a lot to you. And then a man showed up. And completely derailed the conversation. He cried what social media refers to as white tears. He cried white tears all in my comments, sent me outrageous private messages about how I was the real racist, those types of things. And so it made me rethink, one, who my friends are, because that guy was crazy. And two, what I choose to share and how I share that and who I share it with. And so for privacy and like self-care mental reasons, sometimes I use a list on Facebook. And if I post something, if I post something about like feminism, or if I post something about gender or the election, I have a list, it's called You Don't Even Go Here. And unfortunately, that list tends to be mostly men, because I found that sometimes they take opinions personally, as if it's a personal attack on them, as opposed to just understanding that it is my larger critique of society. And so they read it and say, well, I'm not like that, you're wrong, and this is why. And then it becomes this kind of like angry social media bingo where you can kind of predict what they are going to say and completely derail the conversation. So I've started using lists for that reason. But last week, I saw a lot of people posting very personal and heartfelt status updates about either, hey, this is the day I'm going to tell everyone I'm out. And then I saw status updates about people talking about the reaction they received from their family and their friends after coming out. And not all of those things were, like you could tell that they didn't get the support that they thought that they were going to get from their family. And so whenever I see people that do the overshare thing, I try not to judge, because you don't know if they have people in their day-to-day life that they can actually go talk to and see face-to-face and talk about those experiences. And you just never know what's going on in someone's life, what compels them to feel like I need to be extra vulnerable in this space. But for me personally, I don't think I overshare. Do I overshare, Olivia? No. Okay. Like I save it for brunch. Like for me, that's how I operate. But and on social media, you can always opt to unfollow someone if you feel like it's too much. But I try not to judge, and I also try not to overshare, because it's something that I personally don't feel like I need to do publicly, because the internet is forever.
It is forever. Last question. Yes.
First of all, I want to tell you, just you're concerned about how you come across as one of the 7 people you are off.
Thank you.
Very poised and intelligent and insightful, and I appreciate that. You just raised something that just made me think, and I know you don't want to talk about the Democratic Party, but I'm wondering, you said somebody kidnapped you and called you a racist. Have you had any personal, there's a lot of vitriol and hate and going on in this election cycle and ignorance and people being very threatening. Have you ever felt personally threatened or vulnerable with your political beliefs or racism or being a female or any, has anybody come after you or you felt afraid?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Give you the look. So throughout life journey, career journey, all of that, political whatnot, have you ever felt, racially charged, attacked, threatened, extra vulnerable? And yeah, so with the politics that's happening today, the society that we're in, the city's climate, have you ever felt any of those feelings of harm?
So I have never encountered like direct threat, like I'm gonna hurt you, I'm gonna shake you, I'm gonna call you a racial slur or something like that. I've never experienced that. But I have experienced microaggressions, which I think are just as bad. And I think one of my earliest recollections when I said, oh, okay, this is happening, was in my first job right after college. I worked for a chain of community newspapers, and I had an editor who realized I was competent and would just leave me alone, let me do my job. And then I started to realize that other editors were like talking about me, and they had concerns and questions, even though they weren't my direct boss, which I thought was interesting. It was like, okay, well, why are you even caring what I'm doing when you're not my boss? You don't review my timesheet. What's going on here? I was freelancing at the time while writing full-time at this newspaper, and the editor for the paper called my freelance editor and told her to give me less stories. And then my actual editor, who was my boss, the person who reviewed my timesheet, did my performance evaluations, went to the overall editor of the paper and said, well, Jazzmen said X, Y, and Z, and Jazzmen had said nothing. And so I thought, okay, well, let me think about why this could be happening before I fly off the handle and like flip a table. And I thought, well, maybe it's because let me make sure, have I been doing my job properly? And I had. I hadn't missed any deadlines, I showed up at work on time, I stayed late, I was a team player. And I came to the conclusion that because I was young, because I was a woman, and because maybe they weren't used to dealing with strong-minded, independent, young Black people on a day-to-day basis, they didn't know how to read me. They didn't know how to interact with me, and so they felt that it was okay to take some liberty in treating me like I wasn't competent. And so I remember having conversations with people saying, okay, well, if this person has an issue and they say it's been going on for this amount of time, no one has ever come to me. So I don't understand why all of you people with all this experience and all these years working in this industry are so afraid to come talk to the 23-year-old kid at the editorial desk. And I do believe that they felt that it was okay to talk to me that way because of my gender. I remember one person saying, oh, you came in here and you just look so confident. And I thought, who does she think she is? And I thought that was such a weird thing to tell somebody, especially in an environment where it's a team setting and you're supposed to be working together because the goal is to get out the news. Like, why are you threatened that I feel confident? It's very weird. But no physical harm has happened to me, thank God. And I hope it stays that way.
Is everyone content? Yes? Okay, let's give her a round of applause.